Good morning. Welcome to the Science of Mind class. I'm Dr. Petra, and I'm so happy to be back. I want to say a gigantic thank you to Tracy Brown, RSCP, one of our practitioners, member of our community for a long time, and I'm so grateful she's taken such great care of you. While I've been in our cabin, I've been out working and then having vacation. Thanks to Ryan and Richard for holding the fort, and a huge and giant thank you to Tracy Brown. So I love coming back and being with you guys on a Sunday morning. We're starting one of my, I feel like I say this every time, but I guess it's just the truth. I really love this chapter. So we've spent a lot of time, the first part of the book is about the theory, like what's the philosophy that has been pulled out of all the spiritual traditions, out of psychology and science and religion. What's the philosophy that it has emerged over the 5,000 years that people have been writing about this in the Western tradition? Then the second middle portion of the book is about application. My spirituality should be practical. I should be able to apply it in my life, and it should make a difference, not only in my own life, but in the way in which I engage with the world and my contribution to life, right? So the whole middle section has everything to do with from manifestation to healing and how we apply it in our lives. Now, this last portion of the book here really has to do with a deeper look at living from a spiritual point of view. And this is called What the Mystics Taught, Chapter 20, What the Mystics Have Taught. And we're going to go into the metaphysical teachings of Jesus. And and over this portion, we're really going into a not to, make too fine of a point to it, a more mystical understanding. Not theory, not mental, not application, body, being in the world, that sort of thing. But now more about the spiritual reality, what the mystics have taught. And so as some of you may know, Michael Beckwith, years ago, he coined the term New Thought, Ancient Wisdom. And we know that science of mind is a correlation of the revelations of religion, the opinions of philosophy, the laws of science, the practices of psychology applied to our needs and our highest aspirations. Aldous Huxley called it the Perennial Philosophy. Other people have called it the golden thread. Those deep spiritual truths that sort of regardless of what faith tradition you're looking at, indigenous tradition, Eastern tradition, Western tradition, there are these nuggets that seem to consistently be present. And each of the ways in which humanity tries to understand life adds something to this golden thread, this understanding. And yet, interestingly enough, science of mind, along with a lot of the people who speak about the golden thread, who speak from this point of understanding, actually are considered not mainstream. They're not acceptable. They have been considered heretics. They've been pushed out of their traditions, whether we're talking about Hinduism or Christianity or any tradition. And this is the mystical strain, the mystical aspect of the spiritual path. And in the Christian tradition, we have the Gnostics. In the Jewish tradition, we have the Kabbalists. In Islam, it's the Sufis. There are strains in Hinduism and Buddhism that both have a deep mystical, the Zen tradition, their deep mystical aspect. There are philosophers and scientists, and they all get a little bit of a woo-woo schmear on it. And there's a lot of organizational discomfort because what have the mystics taught? What's the most basic, fundamental, primary thing that they have taught? And they haven't taught it from book learning, and they haven't taught it from reading somebody else's material. They haven't taught it from thinking about it. They haven't taught it from a philosophical point of view. And they haven't taught it as something that's actually useful. They've taught it from their own personal revelation, their own personal experience. What have the mystics taught? The direct revelation of the oneness of life. This is at the heart of the golden thread of the perennial philosophy. So, in the science of mind, we make a distinction between the mystical experience and the psychic experience. We make a distinction between intuition in the way that we generally talk about it. I have an intuition that says don't turn left here. I have an intuition that says make this decision, do this thing. Right? We make a distinction between that use of the word intuition and our intuitive knowing of the oneness and the infinite reality and the fact that that's who we are. You can't learn the mystical point of view. You can read about it and be inspired by it. You can hear all the different ways in which people language it, but it only becomes real when we experience it ourselves. And the only reason that it looks different when different mystics talk about it is because we all are embedded in our own cultural milieu, our own culture, the metaphors and the ways in which we understand it, the religious tradition from which that mystical experience is arising. And so there's always different language being used. In the Buddhist tradition, it's the sense of fading into the nirvana, or the bodhisattva who stands at the door and wants everybody to come through, to the 14th century women, Christian mystics who spoke about being the bride of Christ, right? They use a context, contextually it's different, but there's always the same message. There's a deep experience of the presence. And one can't have a deep experience of the presence without actually experiencing it both inwardly as well as all around, right? The science of mind, we say the highest God and the innermost God is one God. And we can have a tendency to flip back and forth between these two, right? I'm talking about my higher self, my indwelling spirit, or, I'm thinking about, well, spirit somehow is going to make this all happen, when, of course, what we really mean is the law is going to make it happen, but we get a little sloppy, and we think, oh, there's something out there that has an idea about what our purpose is, and we can flip back and forth. Or we can say my higher self, which is actually out here somewhere, and isn't actually somehow us. And the mystical experience brings all of that into a whole reality, a wholeness, a unity, an experience of oneness. Mystics are not necessarily pious or holy or different from any of us. Right? Ernest Holmes goes to great lengths at the beginning of this chapter to talk about there's something mysterious about a mystic, and they don't tend to just walk around speaking in angelic terms. They might get mad. they might not, have a life that works all the time. And yet there's something there that is an access, an intuitive access to reality. And he goes on to list, he talks about the poets, the musicians, the scientists, the religious people, the ordinary people. He talks about, who is it? Somebody who's a cobbler. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He names the person. who was a cobbler and just, making shoes, looked up, saw a geranium, and experienced the oneness of life by just contemplating this in this moment of looking at the geranium. And it is in this context that we use the word intuitive knowing, or, as we say in the science of mind, direct revelation. It's the direct revelation of the oneness, not as an intellectual concept, not as a good idea, not as something that I can talk about, but as a deep, lived, felt experience. It's an experience we can court through meditation, through the practice of the presence, through reading inspired materials, through feeling ourselves moved by amazing music, reading incredible poetry, seeing beautiful art, walking in nature, right? All of these things can open a portal, but ultimately the mystical experience is that direct revelation. It's an intuitive knowing. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why the mystics have found themselves in the outs and out from the religious traditions of the day, or from the, quite frankly, even from the art schools and literary, this is the way we do it, academic point of view, all of that. Because when you have direct revelation, it's challenging to, codify it, provide credibility for it. There's no footnote, there's nobody you can point to and say, well, because so-and-so said it, or because they, did a study, or because of my, being in alignment with the practice my teaching, my tradition tells me to do. And it is the direct revelation. And of course, the fear of that direct revelation is that the direct revelation is going to tell you to go out and kill people, or, create mayhem, or do whatever you want and not care about how it affects others. And of course, that's the fear that is spoken about in organized, controlled situations, with the recognition that people do, they do all those things, and they make choices that are not in alignment with spiritual truth. But when it's true direct revelation, you know it, because it's always revealing oneness. Always revealing oneness. And how can you kill or take from others or run amok when you recognize that we're all part of the oneness? Do you see? It's out of that. It's out of the way that mystical direct revelation moves us into the world that is the credibility of it being the mystical understanding. That's what keeps it from being something to be afraid of, and instead something to court. The biggest challenge I think we have with this today is that we have become utterly convinced that the only way that you can know something is because you can point to the facts. Right? That's the gift that science has given us, kept us from being superstitious, moved us out of, doing all kinds of weird things that we thought were somehow going to make a difference, but maybe aren't really making a difference. Right? Takes us out of emotionality and superstition and codifying everything from some power person saying this is it, right? Science has taught us, well, it's lawful and there's facts and we can see it or we can't. And yet we can become so fact-based that the only way that we seek to know something is to, what are the facts, and is it logical, and can we reason our way to it? Right? These are all considered ways of knowing. and they are powerful ways of knowing. What we miss is that direct revelation is also a way of knowing. So is psychic intuition a way of knowing. There are other ways of knowing beyond just facts, senses, and reason. And these are the direct revelation way of knowing and the intuitive psychic way of knowing. And those have, they've fallen by the wayside in many ways in the last 400 years since the scientific revolution. And they have been suspect for 5,000 years. East, west, indigenous, not indigenous, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's hard to control direct revelation. And it doesn't always fall in line with the way one is to practice what it means to be a good person, what it means to be an upstanding person in the culture, in the religious tradition. Are you following the box and what we would call the exo practice, right? Like an insect has an exoskeleton. They have their skeleton on the outside, that hard shell. We have it on the inside, right? Exo practice. It's the very thing Jesus railed against when he railed against the, I was just going to use a word that was incorrect. It's not the Sadducees, but the Pharisees. Thank you. Thank you for thinking, whoever thought that, thank you for thinking it to me. The Pharisees was the very thing that he railed against. Don't stand on the street corner and show me how holy you are. Go into the closet and do your work in secret. And so that's how you prove that you're holy, right? You do the thing and everybody can see it and you do it according to the rules. And it's safety. You're safe there because you've been told if you do these things, then you are safe. God is pleased with you. You will go to heaven or whatever the reward is. Direct revelation is that inner experience. It's the inner practice. It's the inner awareness. It's the willingness over and over and over and over again to question ourselves. Am I in alignment with spiritual truth? Not my truth, not my human truth, the spiritual truth. Am I in alignment with the spiritual truth? And we have to constantly ask ourselves, what is that spiritual truth? If we have an experience of oneness and we begin to extrapolate from that, what does that mean about life and about the creation and the material universe and us as human beings and us as spiritual beings and us as beings who can actually have this experience and begin to become aware of an entirely different criteria from which to engage with the world, as opposed to seeking to live inside or up to a set of external practices. And this is where that intuition, the intuition of direct revelation, comes in. It is that inner awareness and that inner experience that guides us to spiritual truth. And we would say truth with a capital T. This is a truth that cannot be changed based on your perspective. These are universal truths. Truths that are true all the time, everywhere, for everybody, in every situation or circumstance. And when we look at the mystics throughout the ages, you begin to see there's not a lot of rules and there's only a few spiritual truths. Oneness, love, creativity, purpose, passion, self-expression. Yeah, you can pretty much name them probably on less than 2 hands. Because it's not about form, it's not about acceptability, it's not about, am I being a good human? Being a good human is a natural outcome of being in that mystical awareness. Now, although it may not look like a good human based on the culture you're in, or your family, or your parents, or your priest, or your shaman. So I just read a really great book I highly recommend. I super highly recommend it. It's called The 40 Rules of Love, a novel of Rumi. Can't think of the author right now. It's called The 40 Rules of Love, a novel of Rumi. It's a fabulous read. Oh my gosh. And of course, it's fiction. It's historical fiction. Somebody is telling the story about Shams, who was Rumi's beloved, and how that impacted Rumi from being a religious academic to moving into becoming a mystical dervish. And it's pretty extraordinary. It was a beautiful thought experiment about what that must have been like and what it looks like to live from a mystical point of view. So what the mystics have taught has been veiled in so many ways, because how do you speak about oneness with a language that separates and categorizes and creates duality? It's either this or it's not. It's either the table or it's not the table, right? All of that is the struggle, which is why so many of the mystical writings are in poetry, or they're in metaphor, or they're in almost unintelligible, because it's not intended to be fact-based or rational-based. It is intended to compel us into the same experience that the mystic has had and wants so desperately for us to have for ourselves, that experience. All right, so the last thing we're going to say before we open this up, I invite you to really contribute to this conversation. The last thing I want to say is that in the science of mind, we make a distinction, and we are going to talk about this over the next couple of weeks. We make a distinction between the mystical experience and the psychic experience, mystical intuition and psychic intuition. And we could describe that as using the Celtic cross, right? The equilateral cross and the circle. The circle is the whole. The circle is everything. And the vertical axis is that axis of identification. The highest God and the innermost God is one God. And so it is the identification with our spiritual reality. And this is the mystic intuition that moves out of the individual into the universal spiritual truth and brings that universal spiritual truth to an individualized awareness and a way of experiencing it and expressing it. So you get the vertical axis. The psychic intuition we would put on the horizontal axis, which is the axis of phenomenon, of the phenomenal universe, the created universe. And so what the psychic experience is reading universal subjective mind, right? Edgar Cayce called it the Akashic Records. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, right? And according to Edgar Cayce, he was able to go into his hypnotic trance, and he would literally walk the halls of the Akashic Records, and he would look for individual people or circumstances or situations, and he would seek to see what's revealed there, right? And in universal subjective mind, there's no intention in universal subjective mind. It's just the holder of anything and everything that has ever been thought, everything that has ever been experienced, everything that has ever been created, and the trajectory of that as long as nothing changes. Right? And so there's deep validity in the psychic experience, but the psychic experience is by nature individual. There's a reading for a person or a nation or or even the world of some discrete, physical, created experience. And there's an ability to see and sense into the past, ability to see and sense into the future, because of course we know that, all of that's just part of the way in which our senses manage all of this space-time continuum. but it's very individualized, and people can read it differently, and people can interpret it differently, and sometimes there's a more clear revelation than others. And so the psychic experience is the ability to do that, and the mystical experience is the ability to do this, the vertical experience of the oneness. These are not mutually exclusive by any means. You can do both. What we don't want to do is confuse the two, because psychic phenomena is just more phenomena, and it can be very enticing, very interesting. We can decide we can't do anything until we have our psychic reading, or until we know we can become as enthralled with our psychic phenomena as we can become enthralled with, money and sex and food. It's more phenomena. The mystic experience invites us into the experience of oneness, which has really no individuality, right? It's universal truth, universal experience of oneness. So we're going to stop there, because that's kind of the preamble. That's the first couple of 2-3 pages of this, what the mystics have taught. And so I want to stop there and turn to Ryan, say good morning to Ryan. I'm happy to see you and happy to be back here and see what's going on out there.
Likewise, Dr. Petra, it's good to have you back, and shout out to Dr. Tracy Brown. We really enjoyed having her here, and we shared a lot of juicy conversation. It was great.
Yes.
And it's great to have you back, and it's great to have everybody here that's watching and participating here with us on Zoom and on Facebook Live. And now is your opportunity to talk with us, and we want to hear from you. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. The first way is, if you're watching us here in the Zoom room, you can go ahead and hit the raise your hand icon located down below, and I can call you into the room. The other methods are going to the chat, and you can put your questions or comments in there, and the same goes true for those who are watching us on Facebook. And I can bring all the questions from the chats inside of the discussion here today, so that way we can create a safe container to answer your questions. And speaking of that, I like to keep all of those anonymous. That way we can have that safe container. So with that being said, I would like to have Connie come into the room. Connie, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello?
Good morning, Dr. Petra. Good to see you.
Good morning, Connie. Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you. My intuition has been becoming much stronger and more reliable for me in the last so much time. I don't know, year-ish, something like that. And but I'm kind of navigating things, and step by step, and in a sense kind of fumbling around, accepting it, But and it's good. It's good. Good experience. And I have come to understand. I'd like to know your perspective on this. I've been coming to think of different religions in the world religions, as cultural expressions of one thing, which is the connection with spirit or God. And therefore, in my heart and in my mind, why would it be possible to oppose some religion? I'm interested in studying them and learning them and going deeper into them, and understanding that they are about one.
Yes. Yes, beautiful. Thank you, Connie. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, and that is a classic mystical point of view. So good for you for joining the rank of the mystics, right? And being a mystic in your own right. The recognition that every faith tradition sees some face of the divine, the infinite reality. And all we ever argue about is the exo practice. Should women cut their hair? Should, men do certain kinds of work? Whatever it is, do we force people into our religion or not, right? All of these are exo practices. And as you say, many of them are very much culturally embedded, and they both inform the culture and also are informed by the culture in which they grow and shift and change. And so for me, it's always been, I think of the infinite reality. I think of this oneness, this wholeness, which is both transcendent and indwelling. I think of it as a mountain, a giant, infinite mountain. And it's so big that actually nobody can actually see the whole thing. You can't see the whole thing. So what do? You go to the part of the mountain that is of interest to you. Some people like to rock climb. I'm not a rock climber. I think that is a very scary thing to do. But some people like to climb the sheer face, right? And so they get training, they get practice, they use certain equipment. And boy, you do it this way or you're going to fall off that mountain. So you better do it this way. I'm a hiker. I like to amble around. I like to go up the valleys. I love to go around the ridges. And whether I actually get to the top or not, it's not necessarily the goal. I want to have the experience of being on the side of the mountain. I don't need rappelling equipment. I don't need to know how to hammer a baton into the rock face. I don't need to have the strength in my hands to do that. I need to be able to carry my pack for a really long time. I'm an endurance walker. Right, and I can tell you about that. I can tell you how to find campsites and how to make sure you have clean drinking water, right, which a rock climber doesn't need or doesn't care about. And yet we're both climbing the same mountain. And you might climb the rock face for a while and then go, okay, I'm kind of done with that. That's a little hard. Maybe I just want to wander around in the valleys for a while. Or you can wander around the valleys for a while and go, man, I'm ready to go right up there. I see those people doing it. I'm going to do that. And to argue about which is the better way to climb the mountain is crazy, right? It's completely crazy. And to argue that if you're walking in the valleys, you have to go by the rules of the mountain, of the rock climber, is equally as crazy. So I think that you say something really important, Connie, and that is a beautiful expression of what it means to be a mystic. So thank you so much. Ryan.
Yeah, I see that we have a question here, and it goes a little something like this, because I know this is going to be a very interesting answer. How do we become one with the Universal One Oneness?
Well, we might turn the question around. If it's one, how could you not be part of it? So I think the assumption that the mistake, let's say the mistake in the question is that you have to become one. We are already one. We can't get outside of one. And the question itself comes from a human point of view. I'm a separate human being. There's some divine reality out there, and I have to join myself to it. The mystics understand that there is no separate reality. You are actually the infinite reality becoming individualized and waking up to that. Actually, all of creation is this infinite reality clothing itself in form. It's constantly taking form and changing forms, and all the multiverses and all the planets all over the galaxy, and millions and bazillions, and all of that it's an infinite reality. It's an infinite oneness. So it needs infinite ways in which to express itself. And one of those infinite ways ultimately is, in however many places and ways, for consciousness to become conscious of itself. And that's what self-awareness is, whether it's in the human or any other animal on the planet or anywhere else in the multiverses, where there's consciousness becoming aware of consciousness. So it's not so much that we have to become one, it's that we have to become aware of oneness. These are two very different things. You can't become one. You can't, actually, because there's no mechanism to bring two things together that aren't separate. It's all about awareness. So this is why we teach meditation, and we teach reading spiritual books, and we teach all kinds of things. But I will share with you my personal kind of weird way of having explored this for myself. Maybe this will help. So I don't usually use the word God very much these days. I find that it cats a lot of trapping, but it's a short word. It's a short little pithy word. It's like a little glyph, like the artist formerly known as Prince had that little glyph, and we all knew who that meant, right? So the word God we can think of as just a little glyph that basically means this infinite oneness. And so I was reading all these books about mysticism and courting the presence and exactly this question, becoming one. And like, I don't even get this. And what does it mean to pray without ceasing? Like to always be in the experience of God. Like what? I have to say the Our Father and the Hail Mary, which of course will tell you that I grew up Catholic. And I was like, okay, I don't know how to do my work while I'm also doing the Our Father and the Hail Mary. And so I just began to think about, well, I don't even want to say the word think. I set myself the task. If it's all one, everything that I'm looking at is a part of the one, is the one expressed, is the one making itself manifest. So I literally started walking around, looking, whatever I looked at, just going God, naming it God. You don't have to use the word God. It's the short word. I didn't want a 2-syllable thing. I wanted something really simple. God, 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 God. I mean, literally, I did this for days and weeks and months. And one day it started looking back at me. And I began to sense in that intuitive experience of direct revelation, there's no separation. We don't have to overcome separation. We have to overcome our sense of separation. And we have to recognize that our sense of separation is necessary for our awakening. The oneness cannot awaken to itself without a sense of separation, without an aspect of itself being able to experience separation and then look back at itself and go, oh, this is what's going on, right? So the whole story of Adam and Eve and the fall from grace is not a fall from grace at all. It is an awakening. It is the required separation, sense of separation, not real separation. Where would you go? If it's an infinite reality, how can you become one with something that is already everywhere all the time? That's what omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent means. Omnipresent, everywhere present all the time. Everywhere. There's nothing that you can name. No quark, no galaxy, no person, no thing, nothing. Now, this is not experience. This is the creative universe, because there are certain experiences that are human generated. But there's nothing that you can point to or name that isn't a manifestation of that oneness, including this right here. And so we want to stop thinking about bridging the gap. And I think this is why they use the term courting the presence. Because at some point when we fall in love, right, don't we feel that oceanic oneness? Like we're just one with our beloved. It's just, we hardly can tell where we end and that other person starts. And it's this amazing experience. And that's what it means when we court the beloved, when we fall in love with the divine. We begin to move beyond our mind-created categories and experience of these things, which we have to deal with the space-time continuum. We move beyond that. And we discover, I guess I would say, work to discover the oneness that you already have, that you already are. I think we should just stop trying to become one. Let's just discover the oneness. You can also expunge the word with from your spiritual vocabulary. I am one with God. I seek to be one with the divine. I want to become one with infinite reality. Do you see that word with automatically implies that sense of separation that causes that question? How do you become one? So expunge the word with and find another way of saying it. Force yourself into metaphors that don't use the idea of joining, bringing two separate things together. Abandon all metaphors that speak about that and seek only metaphors that talk about all the different ways a oneness can be revealed in multiplicity. For me, it's trees. It's a tree. It's a tree. It's one tree, but it has a trunk. It has all these branches, lots of twigs, lots of leaves. The leaves fall off. They separate. They separate from the tree, and then there's fruit, and the fruit falls off. And then the next year, there's a whole bunch more leaves. And we call it a tree, but we can point to individual things that are actually separate, but not. That was another big thought experiment for me. Really, and not just thinking about it, but feeling it, sensing it, inviting it to reveal itself to us in some really powerful way. If that were true about the oneness, then I'm as much a part of the oneness as the leaf is a part of the tree or the twig or the acorn or the bark or the root or the, do you see? And to begin to use these metaphors to bring ourselves into that state of oneness. So stop trying to become one. You already are. It's just a remembering. It's all Plato said. Right? All learning is ever remembering. Oh, sure, not learning calculus and, learning how to weld. But deep spiritual truth, it's a remembering. That's all it ever is. It's a remembering, which is why we use the term revelation. It's the direct revelation. Take a metaphor of oneness, anything that you can think of, and invite it to reveal itself as the oneness to you. Not as like, oh, show me the oneness, but to reveal what really is oneness and how does that include me? Yeah. Okay, Ryan.
All right, Dr. Petra. Welcome back. Right? And so I do have time for one last person we're going to bring in, and that's Dennis. Dennis, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Hi, Dennis.
Oh, good morning. And I ditto that. Welcome back. Okay, this thing about oneness, it brought to mind, I just had to share this. There was a class you gave, and the best meditation exercise I've ever experienced in my life is what the mystics knew. And this has to do with this oneness thing. Uh-huh. Okay, so everybody knows what she did was she got us through this meditation to where you just get rid of pretty much all the physical stuff. Get rid of your car, just let it drop off. Get rid of your house, get rid of your job. And this goes on and on and on. And it takes a while, but it goes on. And it's amazing how light I started to feel. Yeah. And then the big huge question at the end was, okay, what's left? Uh-huh. Well, all that could be left was the I that I am, which is really where it starts. I mean, when I contemplated this, it was great. And then, over days and weeks, I contemplated this here and there, and it's like, okay, so I have built this sense of separation by creating my life. But the oneness was always there.
Yes.
And therefore, I picked up I don't know if it's a mantra or what, but it came out of the blue one day. And I'm just like, no, I'm not an individual. I'm an individual expression. Yes. There's a difference.
Big difference.
and that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so grateful that that meditation meant so much to you. It's one of my favorites. And it is one of the ways that I began to do that work, exactly as you describe. And you let go of everything, including your past and your future and your memories and your roles and all the way down to your body and everything. And just and in a deep meditative state. And then we're left there. And when we're left there, what we recognize is where we're left is actually a universal place. And yet the individualized experience of it is still there. It's not just a morphing into oneness where the individualized experience disappears. And that's a whole nother paradox. So we'll keep talking about it. So thank you for your sharing. Thank you for being with me this morning. Please do read. Feel free to disagree. Feel free to bring your questions, comments, disagreements, thoughts about it. And we can talk about more practices and more things that we can do to open the portal, to open the experience of our own sense and revelation of oneness. We got lots of classes starting up, so do check out CSLDallas.org. Lots of classes and workshops coming up, all kinds of great stuff. Sorry that we're back online, but I love, love, love being with you, and we'll let you know when we're back in person as soon as we can. In the meantime, let's stay connected right here on a Sunday morning in Science Mind class, in our celebrations, Wednesday night, all the ways in which we stay connected. Thanks so much. Bye for now.